There is a man sitting in a temperature-controlled office on an ergonomically designed chair staring at a screen that is doing the cognitive work his ancestors would have performed manually. He has GPS navigation so he never needs to memorize routes. He has a calendar application so he never needs to track time by the position of the sun or the phase of the moon. He has a supermarket 4 minutes away, so he never needs to know which plants in his environment are edible or where animals gather to drink. He has antibiotics and analgesics and antihistamines covering biological vulnerabilities that his predecessors navigated using accumulated knowledge of the landscape around them. He is, by almost every material measure, more comfortable than any human being who lived before him. He is also, by a growing body of evidence, considerably less capable in certain foundational ways than the people whose capabilities built the civilization that now maintains his comfort so effortlessly that he never has to think about it. This is not a complaint. This is not a call to abandon modern life and return to something more authentic. It is an observation about how human capability works. How the abilities we use develop and persist while the abilities we don't use atrophy and eventually, across generations, can diminish to the point where the population no longer carries them in the form they once existed. Evolution is not a one-way ratchet toward complexity. It is a response to selection pressure. And when selection pressure for a capability disappears, the genetic and developmental resources devoted to that capability tend to be reallocated elsewhere. We have over thousands of years of civilization and tens of thousands of years of anatomical modernity lost things. Some of those losses are clearly worth celebrating. The ability to digest raw meat without illness is not something worth mourning. But others represent capabilities of functional significance that the modern world has simply stopped selecting for, with consequences that range from mildly interesting to concerning. The first and most physically dramatic loss is sheer musculoskeletal capability, and the evidence for it is written unambiguously in bone. Bone is not a static structure. It is a dynamic tissue that responds to the mechanical forces placed upon it by adding density and structural reinforcement where loads are greatest. This is why professional athletes develop denser bones than sedentary individuals in their sport-specific loaded limbs. This is also why astronauts lose bone density during extended spaceflight. Without gravitational loading, the bone remodeling system interprets the reduced stress as a signal that the current bone mass is more than necessary and begins to reduce it. When paleoanthropologists compare the bone morphology of prehistoric hunter-gatherer populations with modern human populations, the differences are substantial and consistent. Prehistoric leg bones show curvature and cortical thickness indicating loading patterns so far beyond anything modern humans experience that biomechanical reconstructions suggest average running and walking loads that would exceed what most modern elite athletes sustain in training. The bones of ancient humans were not simply more robust as an incidental feature of their genetics. They were more robust because the physical demands placed on them throughout life produced bone architecture appropriate to those demands. The femur cross-sections of Upper Paleolithic Europeans show a particular pattern of loading asymmetry and curvature consistent with highly variable terrain travel across very long distances. Analysis suggests these individuals covered distances and navigated terrain difficulty that modern long-distance hikers with specialized equipment would find challenging. They did this in moccasins or bare feet, without trail maps, without energy gels, carrying whatever they were transporting between camps or hunting locations. The decline in bone robusticity from the Paleolithic through the Neolithic and into the modern period is one of the most consistent findings in paleoanthropology. Agriculture reduced mobility. Settled life reduced terrain variety. Industrial life reduced physical loading to levels that would have been inconceivable to our ancestors. The bones of modern humans reflect this history. We are, on average, structurally more fragile than our predecessors in ways that have real functional consequences and that require deliberate compensatory exercise in modern life to partially offset. The muscle mass distribution has followed the same trajectory. Ancient human musculature, reconstructed from skeletal muscle attachment site morphology, indicates upper body strength in particular that exceeds what modern populations typically develop without dedicated training. The physical demands of hunting with thrown weapons, of processing large animal carcasses with stone tools, of constructing shelters and carrying loads across varied terrain, These built musculature as a byproduct of daily life in the way that modern office work emphatically does not. The navigational capabilities of our ancestors represent a loss that is actively accelerating in real time, in our current generation, in ways that researchers are beginning to document with some alarm. Wayfinding, the ability to navigate complex terrain without external aids, was a survival-critical skill for most of human history. The detailed spatial memory required to navigate across tens of thousands of square kilometers of territory, to remember water sources, and seasonal camp locations and hunting grounds, and the routes connecting them, to read landscape features and celestial cues and animal behavior as navigational information. This was not optional knowledge for hunter-gatherer populations. It was essential knowledge, and the cognitive infrastructure supporting it was maintained by constant use across every day of adult life. Neuroscientific research on hippocampal function, the brain region most directly involved in spatial memory and navigation, has documented that London taxi drivers, who, before GPS navigation was common, had to memorize the layout of thousands of streets and routes to pass their licensing examination, develop measurably enlarged hippocampi relative to comparison populations. The navigational demand literally changed the brain structure. The same relationship between spatial demand and hippocampal development presumably operated across human evolutionary history. Populations whose survival depended on sophisticated spatial memory developed and maintained that memory through constant use. GPS navigation removes that demand. Research published in multiple peer-reviewed journals has documented that GPS use is associated with reduced hippocampal engagement during navigation. People following GPS directions show less spatial learning from their routes, form weaker cognitive maps, and demonstrate reduced ability to navigate the same routes independently after GPS-guided experience relative to people who navigated the same routes using traditional wayfinding. The convenience that GPS provides comes with a measurable cognitive cost in terms of spatial memory development and maintenance. Across generations, if navigational demand continues to be outsourced to technology, the selection pressure that maintained the navigational cognitive infrastructure weakens. This does not produce immediate evolutionary change. Genetic selection operates on timescales of generations. But the developmental expression of navigational capability, which requires environmental demand to fully express, can decline within a single generation of reduced demand. The traditional navigational knowledge of cultures that maintained sophisticated wayfinding systems. Polynesian navigators who crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean using star positions, wave patterns, bird behavior, and swells. Indigenous Australian tracker navigators whose landscape knowledge extended across continental scales. Represents the upper range of what the human navigational system is capable of given appropriate developmental demand and training. That upper range is essentially absent from modern populations who have never needed to develop it. Sensory acuity across multiple modalities has declined in modern populations relative to both our evolutionary predecessors and to contemporary populations whose lifestyles maintain higher sensory demand. Olfaction, the sense of smell, is perhaps the most dramatically reduced in modern populations. Humans have approximately 400 functional olfactory receptor genes, which sounds impressive until you note that other mammals have considerably more, and that roughly half of human olfactory receptor genes have become non-functional pseudogenes over evolutionary time. The trajectory of human olfactory reduction correlates with the increasing dominance of visual processing and the reduced survival relevance of olfactory information as our ancestors became more dependent on vision and social communication. But within modern humans, there is substantial variation in olfactory capability that correlates with training and use. Professional perfumers and sommeliers develop olfactory discrimination capabilities far beyond population norms through sustained, deliberate training. They can identify and distinguish hundreds of olfactory compounds that untrained individuals cannot separate. Indigenous hunter-gatherer communities with high reliance on olfactory tracking information show average olfactory acuity measurably higher than industrial population comparisons. The capability is present in the genome. Its expression varies with demand. The Moken people of coastal Southeast Asia Sea nomads who spend much of their lives on and in the ocean have been documented with underwater visual acuity approximately twice that of European comparison populations. Children specifically trained this capability through the cultural practice of underwater spearfishing show the greatest enhancement. When European children were given equivalent training periods, their underwater acuity also improved substantially, suggesting the capability is not genetically exclusive to the Moken, but is developed through demand in their population in ways that other populations simply don't require. Auditory discrimination, the ability to extract meaningful signal from complex acoustic environments, shows similar patterns. Hunter-gatherer populations in sonically rich environments develop auditory pattern recognition capabilities that allow them to interpret animal calls, wind patterns, and environmental sounds as information sources, in ways that urban populations whose auditory environments are dominated by mechanical noise and whose survival does not depend on acoustic interpretation do not develop. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. The absolute hearing capability shows the expected modern decline from chronic noise exposure and earbud usage, but the more interesting capability is the interpretive layer, the ability to extract meaning from acoustic information, which requires not just functional hearing, but extensive domain knowledge and attentional training that modern acoustic environments do not demand. The immune system represents a category of lost capability that has direct and increasingly well-documented health consequences for modern populations. The hygiene hypothesis, originally proposed by David Strachan in 1989, and significantly developed since, observes that the dramatic rise in allergic and autoimmune conditions in industrialized populations over the 20th century correlates with reductions in infectious disease exposure in early life. The immune system, shaped by millions of years of evolution in environments containing parasites, bacteria, viruses, and environmental antigens in quantities orders of magnitude greater than modern hygienic environments provide, requires early life microbial exposure to calibrate properly. Without adequate early life microbial challenge, the immune system's regulatory mechanisms, the systems that distinguish self from non-self, harmful from harmless, are inadequately trained. The result is an immune system prone to inappropriate responses, allergic reactions to harmless environmental antigens, autoimmune attacks on the body's own tissues, inflammatory responses calibrated for fighting parasites being triggered instead by pollen and food proteins, and the body's own joints. Ancient humans were not plagued by allergic rhinitis and peanut allergies and Crohn's disease at modern rates. The epidemiological evidence for this is solid. These conditions are rare to absent in populations maintaining traditional lifestyles with high microbial exposure, and their prevalence rises in populations adopting industrialized hygiene practices. The immune capability being lost is not the ability to fight pathogens. Modern medicine handles that remarkably well. But the regulatory sophistication that allowed ancient immune systems to accurately distinguish what required a response from what did not. The gut microbiome dimension of this story has emerged as a major research area, with findings that continue to accumulate in consistent directions. Modern gut microbiomes, studied through large-scale sequencing projects, show dramatically reduced diversity compared to those of populations maintaining traditional diets and lifestyles. The Hadza of Tanzania, one of the few remaining truly traditional hunter-gatherer populations, carry gut microbial communities with diversity levels roughly twice those of average American populations. Specific microbial taxa common in traditional microbiomes are essentially absent from modern industrial microbiomes, representing genuine losses of microbial capability that the host immune and metabolic systems co-evolved to rely upon. Memory. The raw capability for information retention and recall without technological assistance shows patterns of both natural decline and culturally accelerated degradation that are worth distinguishing carefully. The natural evolution of human memory is interesting because it appears to have traded certain animal-typical memory capabilities for the human cognitive specialties that support language, planning, and social cognition. Human episodic memory, memory for personal experiences, is remarkably good, supporting the autobiographical narrative that underlies human identity and social communication. Human semantic memory, factual knowledge about the world, can be extensive and detailed with appropriate motivation and organization. But human memory for certain categories of information that other animals retain more reliably, precise spatial locations, exact sensory details, olfactory memories, shows the trade-offs of a system reorganized for linguistic and social function. Within human populations, the difference between cultures that depend on memory for critical knowledge transmission and cultures that rely on external storage is dramatic and measurable. Oral cultures, cultures without writing, must maintain in living human memory the accumulated knowledge that literate cultures offload to text. The feats of memory documented in oral traditions are extraordinary by modern standards. Homeric bards who could recite tens of thousands of lines of epic poetry, Aboriginal Australians who maintained navigational and ecological knowledge encoded in song across territories covering thousands of square kilometers, Vedic priests who could recite texts of enormous length with word-perfect accuracy across decades. These capabilities were not magical or genetic exceptions. They were products of a memorization culture that treated memory as the primary information storage medium and trained it accordingly from early childhood. The memory palace technique, documented in ancient Greece and Rome, demonstrates that deliberate memory training can produce retention capabilities that seem superhuman to untrained modern observers, but are simply the upper range of normal human mnemonic capacity given appropriate training demand. Writing, printing, digital storage. Each technological extension of external memory has reduced the demand on biological memory and correspondingly reduced the incentive to train it. The modern convenience of looking up any fact at any moment produces the documented Google effect. Knowing that information is available externally reduces both the likelihood of encoding it in biological memory and the depth of that encoding when it occurs. The metacognitive skill of knowing where to find information is replacing the cognitive skill of holding that information, and what we are gaining in accessibility, we are trading for depth of retention. Thermoregulatory capability, the body's ability to manage temperature across extreme environmental ranges, represents a category of lost capacity that most modern people have never experienced from either end of the spectrum. Modern humans in temperature-controlled environments, heated buildings in winter, air-conditioned buildings in summer, experience a dramatically narrower thermal range across the year than any of our ancestors experienced across any period of human evolutionary history until approximately the 20th century. The physiological systems managing cold and heat tolerance respond to demand in the way that other physiological systems respond to demand. Use them, and they develop. Avoid using them, and they atrophy. The cold tolerance documented in populations without heating infrastructure. The ability to sleep outdoors in temperatures that would produce hypothermia risk in acclimatized modern people. The capacity to work effectively in cold water and cold air that would disable someone acclimatized to modern indoor temperatures represents the developed end of a physiological range that modern populations access only partially. Research on deliberate cold exposure has documented measurable improvements in cold tolerance, brown adipose tissue activation, and autonomic cold response with consistent training, demonstrating that the capability is present but typically undeveloped in modern populations. Brown fat, the metabolically active adipose tissue that generates heat through non-shivering thermogenesis, is present in all humans in infancy and was presumably maintained in functional quantity across more of adult life in populations regularly exposed to cold. Modern adults in thermally comfortable environments have substantially less metabolically active brown adipose tissue than cold-exposed populations, and this difference has implications not just for thermal tolerance but for metabolic function and body composition. The Wim Hof phenomenon, widely observed, heavily publicized, and partially scientifically documented, demonstrates that deliberate training can recover capabilities in this domain that modern populations have functionally lost. Whether the capabilities demonstrated by specifically trained individuals represent the genuine ceiling of human thermal tolerance, or simply the trained portion of a range that was maintained more broadly in pre-modern populations, is an interesting question the research has not fully settled. Ecological literacy, the accumulated knowledge of the non-human living world and its patterns, represents perhaps the most dramatic knowledge loss of the modern period, measured not in biological capability but in the cultural knowledge that biological capability was evolved to support. A skilled hunter-gatherer adult in their home landscape carried detailed knowledge of hundreds to thousands of species. Their identification, their behavior, their seasonal patterns, their relationships with other species, their edibility, their medicinal properties, their usefulness for various material purposes. This knowledge was not hobby knowledge or academic knowledge. It was the operational knowledge base on which survival depended, accumulated through years of guided learning and independent experience, and continuously updated through daily observation. Surveys of plant identification ability in modern urban and suburban populations consistently find that adults can identify a handful of common ornamental plants and perhaps a few weeds, with most wild species being completely unrecognizable. The same populations that cannot identify 20 local plant species can identify hundreds of brand logos, product packages, and celebrity faces. Their recognition systems are working perfectly. They are simply pointed at the inputs the modern environment provides rather than the inputs the evolved system was built around. The loss here is not in cognitive capability, but in the application of that capability to the domain that the cognitive architecture evolved to support. The pattern recognition systems that produced sophisticated botanical and zoological knowledge in every traditional culture are fully present and fully functional in modern humans. They simply have no demand placed on them in the ecological domain because the modern food and material economy has made that domain irrelevant to survival. The physical skills of the hand, the fine motor capability built through daily contact with materials and tools and processes, have undergone significant narrowing in modern populations despite the hand's extraordinary evolved capability. The human hand is one of evolution's most remarkable constructions, capable of the precision grip that allows neurosurgery, and the power grip that allows rock climbing, and the fine manipulation that allows watchmaking, and the force that allows climbing trees. A range of functional capability that no tool or machine has replicated across its full breadth. This capability is present in the genome and the neural architecture of every human born, but its expression depends entirely on what the hand is asked to do. Traditional craft skills, the manual knowledge involved in flint knapping, basket weaving, hide tanning, bow making, pottery, weaving, smithing, required and built fine motor capabilities through years of daily practice that produced skilled hands in ways that keyboard operation and touchscreen navigation simply do not. The proprioceptive intelligence of a skilled craftsperson, the hand's ability to read material properties through touch and adjust manipulation accordingly, represents a form of embodied knowledge that develops only through extended material engagement. The decline of manual craft as a central feature of daily life is not a tragedy without compensations. The division of labor that allowed craft specialization to disappear as a universal requirement enabled extraordinary developments in other domains. But the hands we carry are hands evolved for a material engagement with the physical world that most modern people never provide. And the capabilities those hands could express given appropriate demand remain largely unexpressed across the adult population. What do we do with all of this? The honest answer is probably that we don't do anything dramatic, but we understand something important about human capability that the modern comfort bias tends to obscure. Human capabilities, physical, sensory, navigational, immunological, mnemonic, ecological, are not fixed endowments that we either have or don't have. They are dynamic expressions of underlying potential that develops or atrophies in response to environmental demand. The capabilities that have diminished in modern populations have diminished not primarily because of genetic change, the timescale is too short for that in most cases, but because the demand that would develop them is absent. The potential largely remains. This means that the lost capabilities are, to a significant degree, recoverable. Not at the population level through any realistic change in modern life, but at the individual level through deliberate engagement with the demands that develop them. The person who navigates without GPS, who trains physical capability beyond what modern life requires, who develops memory through deliberate practice, who engages the immune system through appropriate environmental exposure, who uses their hands for material work, who learns the living world around them. That person is recovering, piece by piece, some portion of what modern comfort has quietly removed. Not because ancient life was better. It was not, on balance, by most measures. But because the human capabilities built across millions of years of selection pressure are worth expressing, for the intrinsic value of what they make possible, and for the fuller understanding of what we actually are that expressing them provides. We are not the sedentary, screen-focused, GPS-dependent, climate-controlled version of ourselves that modern convenience has produced. That version of ourselves is real, but it is a fraction of what the underlying biology is capable of when the world actually asks something of it. The world asked a great deal of our ancestors. The question is how much we want to ask of ourselves.